Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Extremely excited to be covering my favorite NBA team, the Dallas Mavericks. I hope you guys really do enjoy today's video. If you do, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel as well for future uploads and future NBA content. And also, if you're a diehard Mavericks fan, comment hashtag mffl down in the comment section. I'm going to be leaving little hearts on every single mffl comment I see on this video, so make sure to leave that comment down below. I read every single comment on the channel. And reminder, I'm going to be live streaming the entire week of the 2025 NBA trade deadline as well. So not only are you here for this specific trade guide video, which I really hope you guys do enjoy, but I will be live all week long answering your questions for the actual trade deadline in February. So this is the place you're going to want to be for that week, tuning in, listening to all the news, hearing all the rumors, speculation. We're going to be talking about every single team all trade deadline long, so I really hope you guys do look forward to that as well. And let's jump into that video preview here now. First of all, talking about Dallas, I think the best place to start is looking at their hard cap situation in relation to the first apron. That will be where we begin today's video. Then we're going to go over to their tradable players and their contract situation. Dallas is in such a tricky spot right now. There's a lot of options, but there's also a lot of things that could prove to be problematic for Dallas in making some big trades. So we'll talk about that in that segment. Then we'll also move over to the draft pick situation. Dallas has been very aggressive in years past. Which draft picks do they owe out the window right now? Which ones do they have available to trade? We'll break all of that down and more in today's video. We're also going to look at long-term cap space. Is that actually something Dallas maybe could ponder using? We'll see. Then we'll look at roster tweaks. What does this Mavericks team actually need? What could they go out and maybe target? And who are those potential targets? Which teams could they be potentially working with in a trade to find players that could help them for maybe another playoff push this postseason, just like how last year they had an awesome playoff run? Can Dallas expand on that? Maybe make it back to the NBA Finals, maybe even win the NBA Finals this year with the right roster tweaks and moves? Well, first of all, with that hard cap situation, like I alluded to, the Mavericks are hard capped, and they are hard capped at the first apron. Right now, currently, the day I'm recording this, the Dallas Mavericks have $177.605 million committed to their current roster. The issue here, the hard cap for the first apron sits at $178.132 million, and if you're good with math, if you can, maybe subtract one number from the other, you're going to see they only have about $526,000 of wiggle room here between where they currently sit and where they're allowed to go with that first apron. And $526,000 is a lot to someone like you and me. It's not a lot to an NBA team. So there's not very much wiggle room here. So any move, any trade that Dallas makes ultimately will require them to send more money out the door than they take back in a contract in a trade, essentially. Now, they do have a little tiny bit of wiggle room, that $526,000, but it's not very much wiggle room. So keep that in mind. The Mavericks have this huge $16 million trade exception. Essentially, they cannot use that at all this season. So keep that in mind too. If they were to use it, they'd have to find ways to break up other salary to move that out. It's going to be very complicated and a very convoluted process for Dallas to go about using that trade exception if they were to even find a way to do so. I just am not banking on that for Dallas at this point in time. So when it comes to tradable players, this is where things get very interesting. I'm starting with the guy who I think is probably the most expendable, most tradable at this current point in time, given how his contract is set up and how Dallas probably doesn't need him moving forward, and that is Maxi Kleber from Würzburg, Germany. Obviously a Mavs fan favorite. He just hasn't been the same player, though, has been dealing with a bunch of injuries over the last couple of years, and I think that has really impacted the way he has been able to produce on the basketball court. And after the acquisitions of Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington last trade deadline, Maxi Kleber's role has been really diminished, reduced, and honestly, less essential. So with that in mind, I think Dallas should consider trading him, as well as Dwight Powell, who's making $4 million this year with a player option for $4 million next season. These two guys together equal about $15 million in salary you could trade away. There's a few players we're going to talk about in today's video as potential targets. Now, the issue here, Dallas internally, the relationship aspect, the real life aspect, They like these guys a lot, just like how they really liked Dorian Finney-Smith. Didn't want to trade Dorian Finney-Smith away when they did. They don't want to trade Maxi Kleber. They don't want to trade Dwight Powell. They like having them in their locker room. They like having them in the organization. So you have to keep that real life perspective in mind here too. It's not like Dallas is just throwing these guys in trade finders and finding ways to get deals done. Dallas does not really want to trade these players, but if it comes down to it and improving the roster, it might be something they have to consider. The other contracts that they have on the books that are very friendly to move are Klay Thompson, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, and Najee Marshall. Now, if I had to bet, the Mavericks do not trade any of those 4 players this trade deadline. I wanted to include them here because their contracts are very movable, very trade friendly, but at the end of the day, I don't actually expect Dallas to include them in trades. So when it comes to the draft pick situation in Dallas, what picks do the Mavericks currently owe? Well, first of all, they owe a 2027 first, which is top 2 protected, to Charlotte. That is from the PJ Washington trade. They owe the 2029 first to Houston through the Nets. That was part of the Kyrie Irving trade. They owe a 2028 first-round pick swap to Oklahoma City as part of the trade for Daniel Gafford. They owe a 2030 first-round pick to the San Antonio Spurs as part of the Grant Williams trade from a few off seasons ago. So Dallas, as you can tell, is already owing a pretty significant amount of picks out the door. They already owe a ton of their second round picks as well. I do think it is important to now pivot and look at which picks they could theoretically trade in a potential deal. Currently, these are the tradable draft picks that the Dallas Mavericks have. They could trade, and this is with regard to the Stepien rule, they could trade their 2025 first, which is the draft pick for this upcoming NBA draft. They could trade their 2031 first round pick. They have 2 second round picks to potentially trade in a deal. They could offer swap option in 2026 with their first round pick there. Remember, they owe their 2027 first, top 2 protected, so they cannot really trade that one. And they could also offer secondary swap options to other teams in their 2028 and 2030 first round picks. All in all, it's very complicated. They don't have a lot of trade flexibility when it comes to draft assets. If they were to make a bigger trade, if they were to include multiple first-round picks in a deal, it would likely have to center around the 2025 first, the 2031 first, and then maybe the collection of second-round picks, or maybe you can throw the swap option in 2026. Ultimately, Dallas would have to put together all of these types of pieces to find real value in a trade if they were to make one. But I just don't see that super likely. I'm not sure exactly which player they would go out and offer these picks for, but they do have these picks on the table, specifically the outright ones at the very top of the graphic there, the 2025, 2031 first. Those are the premium valuable draft picks that the Mavericks can offer. That 2025 first, obviously not very valuable around the league right now because the Mavericks have a pretty good record and project to be good this season. And then also the 2031 first is a long ways out. So even though in a vacuum that might hold quite a bit of value, which team and which GM specifically around the league right now has the willingness to wait around for that kind of asset? That's an asset we could see maybe San Antonio have interest in, maybe a team like Oklahoma City. Sam Presti's been stacking up future assets for some time now. Those are some of the teams we could watch for with that 2031 first. But again, when it comes to San Antonio and Oklahoma City, what's the trade partner there? Maybe this is where three-team trade packages become a little bit more sensible. Moving into long-term cap space, is that a way Dallas could look to operate? It's not really an option. Now, I have to say it's not really an option because I think a lot of this does hinge on what happens with Kyrie Irving. All signs point to Kyrie Irving spending the foreseeable future in Dallas. I think that's been one of the big positives. Obviously, as you guys probably know, I was very pessimistic about the Kyrie Irving trade. I ended up being wrong. I'm very happy I ended up being wrong. I was very concerned about the off-court stuff around Kyrie Irving, how his tenure in Boston ended, how his tenure in Brooklyn was ending, how his tenure even in Cleveland ended. I was very concerned about that, and I think he is still somewhat of a wild card. You never really know, but I think so far everything has gone very, very well for him in Dallas. It seems like he likes Dallas. It looks like he has been a very good fit for the Mavericks organization, luckily. So I'm very happy with that. I'm glad that things have gone well. I'm not going to rule out the fact that, maybe he could surprise everyone and opt out of that player option. $44 million for next year. And I mean, if he opts out, maybe he just signs with the Mavericks on a long-term deal. So it's not that there's no risk here for Dallas. I think there is just a little bit of risk because you never know. Maybe something happens between now and free agency, right? You just don't know, especially with Kyrie Irving. But I think all in all, the Mavericks look like a team that is going to be pretty safe. They're not going to have free agency space this offseason, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all either. So when it comes to roster tweaks, what could Dallas theoretically be looking for? And I'm talking about some archetypes of players that I think the Mavericks could really use. And I think a fourth front court contributor. We talked about potentially trading Maxi Kleber, maybe including Dwight Powell into a deal to get the money to work somewhere for a bigger contract over Maxi Kleber's $11 million. And I think that fourth front court contributor would fill into that Maxi Kleber role, maybe give you 15 to 20 minutes a night, help out in foul trouble situations, maybe give you a little bit more flexibility. And the reason I don't have big man or center written down here is I think it's someone who needs to be able to coexist next to either one of Daniel Gafford or Derek Lively. So if they're bringing in a front court player, I think it has to be someone who can shoot the ball a little bit, exist on the perimeter a bit. Kelly Olynyk is someone who can maybe make some sense in that kind of role for Dallas. We'll see if he's on the Mavericks' radar at all. But then also a veteran combo guard. Obviously, Spencer Dinwiddie's been playing relatively well given his contract slot on the roster, but I think the Mavericks may be looking for just a little bit more backcourt stability. I could see them considering another backcourt option if one were to become available for them, someone who could play off the ball. Now, I also do think Quentin Grimes has been a very positive piece for our Dallas Mavericks this season as well. So it's not like this is a huge pressing need. I think if anything, Dallas would prefer a front court player over a backcourt player, but if a quality backcourt player who financially makes some sense into Dallas's roster becomes available, I wouldn't rule out the Mavericks considering that. Obviously, every single team in the league is looking for wings too, so we're going to talk about a wing or two in the next graphic, but I think the priority specifically is a front court player who can offer versatility, rebound the ball, but also not jeopardize your offensive spacing in the half court around Doncic and the center combination there in Dallas. So here are some potential trade targets that I have highlighted. First of all, with the Detroit Pistons, Isaiah Stewart making $15 million a year for the next 4 years. This is a very acquirable contract for the Mavericks, and Stewart is someone who has been a consistently quality three-point shooting big man in his career and has experience playing around other big men. You think about his tenure around, say, Jalen Duren right now in Detroit. Isaiah Stewart could be a very positive addition. Obviously, he has a little bit of a mean streak to him as well. I think could bring a real grit and toughness to the Mavericks that they already have a bit in PJ Washington. I think the Mavericks have a good chip on their shoulder, kind of a good edge to them. And I think Isaiah Stewart could fit into that quite a bit. Now, Detroit, I'm not sure if they're really going to be willing to actually trade him or not. But the Mavericks, if they did open up maybe that 2031 first, offer an extended window to Detroit in terms of trade versatility and flexibility, that's where someone like Trajan Langdon, who is the president of basketball operations over there in Detroit, could really consider something like that as a long-term option and a long-term decision to make for the Pistons organization. Also looking at the Miami Heat, there's a lot of speculation right now around Jimmy Butler, and point blank, I do not think the Mavericks will trade for Jimmy Butler. Now, I do think that there will be interest from the Mavericks. The Mavericks have long sought after stars who are past their prime. Jimmy Butler will be on the Mavericks' radar, but ultimately I just do not see them being able to pull the trigger. And luckily for them, I think the new trade aprons are going to be one of the big reasons why they're going to fail to make a trade there. And I'm very happy about that as a Mavericks fan because I do not want Jimmy Butler on our roster. But I do think Kevin Love, who is making a pretty significantly low amount of money, just $3.8 million, could be an option as that kind of fourth front court option, giving them a little bit more depth and size. He's very acquirable via trade. Given his salary, he also has a second year on that contract, so it's not even just a rental. You could bring in Kevin Love, keep him around for an extra season as well. And obviously he has that past connection with Kyrie Irving, having played with him and won a championship with him in Cleveland. So I do think that is something that could make some sense as well if Miami does ultimately find a trade partner for Jimmy Butler, and then also decides to sell on some of their other veterans, including Kevin Love. I think the Mavericks could get involved there, and it wouldn't even cost them a first-round pick. It would cost them maybe a second-round pick or two in a deal for Kevin Love, so I think that could be a pretty significant upgrade for their bench unit. Herb Jones, this is the headliner. If Dallas were to make available the 2025 first, the 2031 first, the swap option in 2026, and the 2 second-round picks, so essentially Dallas is throwing everything that they have on the table here for New Orleans, I think they could really get close to a deal. Now, you might have to argue, should Max Prosper be included? How about Jaden Hardy? There's going to be pieces in this deal that would need to get discussed and talked about. So that's where some of the difficulty would maybe arise. In terms of the salary going back out to New Orleans, you obviously would probably start with Maxi Kleber's contract, but then I'm sure the Pelicans would want a young player or two as well as those 2 first-round picks. I know it does sound like a mighty cost, but for Mavs fans wondering if Herb Jones is worth it, he definitely is. He's one of the best wing defenders in the entire world, and I think if you look at a matchup with, say, Oklahoma City, having Herb Jones to throw at Shai Gilgeous-Alexander would be a significant advantage that Dallas just presently does not have on their roster. They need to have one more wing defender to kind of work with Najee Marshall. Obviously, the 2 of them played together in New Orleans as well. So I think Herb Jones would be a premier candidate to get traded to the Mavericks. And if Dallas does end up trading those 2 tradable first-round picks, I would really love for it to be for a player like Herb Jones, who I think could be a real championship dictator this upcoming this season, specifically because of the role he can have defensively without sacrificing or jeopardizing your offensive space and context at all. The Brooklyn Nets are a potential trade partner as well, and it would be for the reunion of former Dallas Maverick Dorian Finney-Smith, bringing him back to the American Airlines Center, bringing him back to Dallas. Obviously, he is beloved in the Mavericks organization, and I do think a reunion would be extremely welcomed between the 2 parties involved. Now, Brooklyn historically has been rumored to be asking for 1 or 2 first-round picks. I think at this point in time, given what Brooklyn just traded Dennis Schroeder for, which was 3 second-round picks, Schroeder was having a better season than Dorian Finney-Smith. So I think even though Brooklyn has historically wanted a lot for Dorian Finney-Smith, I think as he's aged a little bit, as times have changed a bit, Brooklyn's expectations of what they're going to get back in the trade have probably diminished. And because of that, Dallas maybe could get back involved here in Dorian Finney-Smith, trading, say, Maxi Kleber, Max Prosper, and 2 second-round picks for him is maybe where I would start the negotiations if I was Dallas. Who knows what Brooklyn would want in addition to that, but I think that's where the starting point should be for a framework. And if Dallas can walk away with Dorian Finney-Smith, re-implement him into their roster, we know how good of a fit he is next to Luka Doncic as a corner shooter specifically, something Dorian did very well in his time in Dallas, and I think that would revert very well back into his natural role again with the Mavericks, coming off the bench this time rather than being asked to be a starter on this team. Bobby Portis is also a name that has been rumored to the Mavericks a lot. I don't see him being a likely outcome for Dallas because I think Milwaukee's in such a weird spot to make trades. I'm just not sure if Bobby Portis is actually going to be on the move or not. But I do think if Dallas does prioritize getting a 4th frontcourt player, Isaiah Stewart, Bobby Portis are kind of the prototypes of what I'm talking about in terms of players that could fit around their existing frontcourt without hurting their team too much. Obviously, Portis gives them a little bit more scoring punch as a bench 6-man type option, and Isaiah Stewart maybe fits in a little bit better in terms of rebounding the basketball and also boxing out and just being a big, strong body who kind of sets that tone, sets that edge a little bit, while also just being more of a floor spacing option compared to Portis, who's going to get in the mid post a bit. He's going to play with his back to the basket here and there. He's going to function as a mid-range pull-up shooter, just doing different things than what Isaiah Stewart offers. But these are the 2 types of players I could see Dallas strongly considering to add into their front court around their existing core nucleus of players. So when it comes to projected activity level, it would not shock me at all if Dallas did make a trade at the deadline, including a first-round pick or even both of their first-round picks in 25 and 31, just because Dallas historically is extremely active the week of the trade deadline. Pretty much every single year for the last 6-7 years, they have made a trade. They have made a notable trade at that. So expect Dallas to be active. Expect Mark Cuban, expect Nico Harrison to be making phone calls, making decisions on the Mavericks' future. I think the chips are in. The team wants to win. They're trying to compete each and every year around Luka Doncic, which I do like. I'm glad that they are pushing their chips and trying. Now, I haven't always agreed with every move that they've made, but they're still good. And a lot of that stems from having a top 3 player in the world in Luka Doncic. So when you have that type of player, you're naturally going to be a good team anyway. Missing the playoffs with him is unacceptable, something that did happen 2 seasons ago. But luckily for us, Mavericks are back to being a real contender, a real quality playoff team, and I think the Mavericks this year are going to continue to carry that trend forward, pushing those chips in, making aggressive trades, and one for Herb Jones, one for Bobby Portis, one for Isaiah Stewart, one for Dorian Finney-Smith in a reunion. Trades like that, I think, do make some sense as reunion possibilities or just flat out trade acquisition possibilities for Dallas this coming trade deadline in February. Again, I hope you guys really did enjoy the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content. Thank you all so much for watching. Really do appreciate each and every one of you. Don't forget about those trade deadline live streams. They will be coming in early February, so stay tuned for that. Make sure to hit that notification bell, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.